This is the Savvy Philanthropist Podcast. My name's Kirk. We are a financial planning podcast for people who want to do philanthropy well. Whether you're a donor trying to do some good in the world, or you're a development officer trying to connect resources with the people who need them, this podcast is all about how to navigate our U.S. legal and financial system in order to make the greatest philanthropic impact you can. This is episode 38, the DAF Landscape. Last week we introduced one of the most popular giving vehicles in philanthropy today, the Donor Advised Fund, or DAF. Today, I want to provide you with some facts and figures to paint a picture of how DAFs fit into the broader charitable landscape of modern giving. According to Giving USA, which, by the way, is sort of the standard annual report for the philanthropic industry, reported that total U.S. charitable giving in 2021 was approximately $484.85 billion. In case you're wondering, the reason I'm going to be working with 2021 numbers for this discussion is because that's the last year for which full data is available. To be clear, that number is the amount of new money donated to philanthropy in 2021. It doesn't refer to charitable money that is already in various endowments and other giving vehicles. So, $484.85 billion in new commitments made in 2021. Now, another group, the National Philanthropic Trust, then published an annual report specifically about DAFs. Full disclosure, the National Philanthropic Trust is a major sponsor of DAFs, so it's not exactly an independent source, but its research is well respected and used generally in the industry. But anyway, according to NPT, total donations to DAFs in 2021 amounted to $72.67 billion. So putting those two reports together, we see that just about 15% of all charitable gifts made in 2021 were made to donor-advised funds. That's a pretty big piece of the overall charitable pie. And it's important to bear in mind that those gifts were added to assets that were already held in DAFs. According to the NPT report, at the end of 2021, DAFs in the U.S. held a total of $234.06 billion. By way of context, private foundations, at the same time, they held a little over $1.3 trillion in assets. So, total DAF assets were about 18% as compared to the total private foundation assets. And just a little side note here, DAFs and private foundations are often compared to each other for a variety of reasons. But put a pin in that for just a moment. We'll come back to it in later episodes. So that gives us an idea of how much money went into DAFs in 2021 and how much was held in them at the end of that year. But those data points aren't quite the most important ones. The critical question is, how much money did DAFs actually distribute to other charities? Because keep the basic structure of a DAF in mind. The donor makes a gift to the DAF, but the money doesn't actually do any good until it is distributed to an operating charity. So what does that look like? Well, in 2021, DAFs made distributions of a bit over $45 billion to operating charities. And note that money out of DAFs in 2021 was $45 billion, but money into DAFs in 2021 was $73 billion. So a lot more in than out. That fact, plus growth in the DAF investments, explains why DAFs just keep growing. So that's a quick summary of the landscape for donor-advised funds. When we talk about DAFs, we're talking about a lot of money and a pretty significant portion of the entire world of American philanthropy. So they matter. For the next couple of episodes, we'll talk about the pros and cons of using them in different situations. But then we'll dig a little deeper into the bit of controversy that tends to follow them around. And by the way, I've included links in the show notes for both of the studies I pulled data from. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. If you know other people who might find this podcast worthwhile, please share it on your social media platform of choice. And if you're feeling particularly generous, a rating or review for the show on whatever podcast service you use would really help to get the word out about the show. You can find The Savvy Philanthropist on the internet at thesavvyphilanthropist.net. You can find me on LinkedIn at the link below in the show notes. And you can follow me on Twitter where I am at @RossPlan. Lastly, if you have any ideas, suggestions, or helpful insights, feel free to email me at thesavvyphilanthropist@gmail.com. That's it for episode 38. Thanks for listening. Next week, we'll start looking at some of the times when using a DAF makes a lot of sense. The week after that, we'll look at some situations where maybe it doesn't. Until then, remember, do well, then do good, but always be savvy.